Welcome to the Aura Lounge. We'll get you checked in right away.
Wait, no, don't, Star. Not here. His voice didn't rise. It tightened, like something inside his chest had just been caught, mid-beat. Damien's steps slowed the moment he crossed the aircraft door, 1 foot forward. The next one hesitating, like his body suddenly forgot what it was supposed to do. The woman beside him laughed softly, adjusting her designer bag on her shoulder. "Babe, why'd you stop?" He didn't answer, because he couldn't. His eyes were locked ahead. Not scanning, not confused, frozen, right there. Standing at the entrance of the aircraft, dressed in navy, posture straight, expression composed, was his wife. Star. For a second, just a second, it didn't feel real. Like his mind was trying to correct it, replace it, fix the mistake. But she didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react the way he needed her to. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't timing. This was something else. Damien? The woman beside him whispered, her smile fading just a little. "You're acting weird." He swallowed, hard. That's my... He stopped himself, too late, because Star had already seen everything. Not just him, but the way the woman stood close to him, just enough to say everything without saying anything. The familiarity, the comfort, the lie, standing right there in plain sight. Damien took a small step forward, lowering his voice quickly, urgently. "Wait, listen, don't do this here." Not anger, not yet. Just panic, raw, quiet, controlled, but slipping, because whatever he thought this moment would be, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not in public, not where he couldn't manage it, not where he couldn't control her reaction. But Star? She didn't rush, didn't flinch, didn't even look surprised. And somehow, that made it worse. Star tilted her head, just slightly, not confused, not emotional, just observant. Her eyes moved once, slow, deliberate, taking in the woman beside him, the way her hand rested too comfortably near his arm. Then back to Damien, and for a brief moment, there it was. A flicker, not pain, not shock, just recognition, like a final piece falling into place. Then she smiled, calm, measured, almost polite. The kind of smile that didn't ask questions, because it already had answers. Damien felt it instantly. That shift, the one he couldn't interrupt. "Star, we can talk about this, just..." "Good evening," she said softly, cutting through him, not loud, not sharp, just placed exactly where it needed to land. Professional, controlled, unreachable. The woman beside him blinked, glancing between them. "Do you two know each other?" Star didn't look at her immediately. Her gaze stayed on Damien for half a second longer. Long enough to let the silence settle. Thick, uncomfortable, heavy in a way that made even the passengers behind them pause, watching without meaning to. Then she turned, just slightly, and with that same calm expression. She spoke. "Welcome on board, Mr. and Mrs." A pause, small, precise, like she was giving the moment time to breathe, or maybe time to break. "I hope you both enjoy your flight." No emphasis, no raised tone, no accusation, and, somehow, that made it hit harder. The woman beside Damien stiffened instantly. Wait, what does she mean? But Damien didn't respond, because he couldn't, because, in that single sentence, everything he had tried to separate, his life, his lies, his control, had just collided, right here, in front of everyone. And Star? She didn't wait for a reaction, didn't linger, didn't explain. She simply stepped aside, making space for them to walk in, as if nothing had happened. And that silence, that quiet, deliberate silence, said more than anything she could have shouted. And just like that, no shouting, no scene, no chaos. But something between them had already broken. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, in a way that felt final. Damien walked past her. He had to. People were behind them, watching, waiting. But every step felt heavier than it should have been. The woman beside him leaned in again, voice low, uneasy. "Okay, you need to tell me what's going on." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because what exactly do you say in a moment like that? How do you explain a truth that just exposed itself? Without warning, without mercy? His jaw tightened. His hands flexed slightly at his sides, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't have control of the situation. Meanwhile, Star continued greeting passengers, like nothing had shifted, like her world hadn't just been placed right in front of her, for everyone to see. But if you looked closely, just closely enough, you'd notice it. That small pause between her breaths, that extra second before each word, not weakness, not even hesitation, just adjustment. Because some realizations don't hit all at once. They settle in, slowly, quietly, and sometimes that's what makes them harder to escape. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone, fully, completely, only to realize you were the only one being real? No warning, no clear moment where things changed. Just one situation, one unexpected collision, and suddenly, everything starts making sense. The distance, the silence, the things you ignored, because you wanted it to work. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? Not just heartbreak, but clarity, the kind that doesn't ask for permission before it shows up. And the worst part? Sometimes, it doesn't come with closure. It comes with a choice. So, before we go any further, let me say this. If you've ever been in a situation where you gave your all, stayed loyal, stayed patient, only to realize you were standing there alone the whole time, go ahead and hit that like button. Not just for the video, but for you. Because stories like this, they hit differently when you've lived even a piece of it. And hey, if this is your first time here, welcome to Mr. Leo Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. Stories that don't just entertain you, but stay with you long after they end. Now, let me ask you something. Just think about it for a second. What really happens when two completely different worlds collide? When power meets patience? When assumptions meet truth? And when someone you thought you understood turns out to be someone you never really saw at all? Yeah, this one? It's not simple. So if you're already feeling the tension, if something about this moment feels a little too real, go ahead, subscribe, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, because you're going to want to stay all the way to the end of this one. Trust me, what unfolds here, it doesn't just test a relationship, it reveals it before the uniforms, before the airports, before that quiet moment where everything shifted. Star had already lived a life that taught her one thing. You don't bend just because life gets loud. She grew up in a house that never stayed quiet for too long, not because there was chaos, but because there was life, real life. Sunday afternoons meant the front door barely closed, voices layered over each other from the living room to the kitchen, music playing somewhere in the background, the smell of food settling into everything like it belonged there. Her aunt would always be the loudest, not in a disruptive way, just present. "Baby, come here," she'd call out, waving Star over with a wooden spoon still in her hand. "Let me tell you something before you step out into this world." Star, younger then, would roll her eyes just a little. But she always came, always listened, because even when she didn't fully understand it, she felt it mattered. "You don't ever let anybody make you feel small just because they don't understand you," her aunt said one afternoon, pointing that spoon like it was part of the lesson itself. "You hear me?" Star nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. And don't confuse being kind with being weak," her aunt added, softer now. "People will test that, over and over again. That part stayed with her, not as fear, but as awareness. Her mother was different, quieter, the kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. One evening, as they sat folding laundry together, her mother glanced over at her. "You notice things, don't you?" she asked. Star looked up. "What do you mean?" "You watch people," her mum said simply. "The way they talk, the way they act when they think no one's paying attention." Star hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, I do." Her mother smiled faintly. "That's a gift. Just don't ignore what you see." That house didn't teach her how to be loud. It taught her how to be certain. There's a difference. She wasn't raised to chase attention. She was raised to recognize her worth, even when no one else acknowledged it. And that kind of foundation, it doesn't crack easily, even when life tries. The first time Star realized not everyone deserved access to her. It didn't come with a big moment, no dramatic ending, no clear warning, just a slow shift. She had been younger, still figuring things out, still believing that effort and honesty were enough to hold something together. He wasn't a bad person. That's what made it harder. He listened. Sometimes showed up. When it was convenient, said just enough to keep things going. And for a while, Star convinced herself that was okay. That maybe this was just how things worked. Until one night, she sat across from him, watching as his attention drifted somewhere else, his phone lighting up more than their conversation did. "Are you even here with me?" she asked quietly. He didn't look up right away. "Yeah, I'm here," he muttered. But it didn't feel like it. Not really. She leaned back slightly, studying him for a moment longer than usual. Not upset, not yet, just noticing. That was always the beginning for her. Not reaction, recognition. "I don't think you are," she said finally. He sighed, like the question itself was an inconvenience. "Why do you always do that?" "Do what?" "Make things deeper than they need to be." There it was, that subtle shift, the one that tries to make you question your own clarity. Star didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She just sat there for a second, letting the moment settle. Then she nodded once. Okay, that was it. No scene, no emotional breakdown, just a quiet understanding forming in real time. Because she realized something in that moment. Effort should never feel one-sided. Care should never feel conditional. And presence should never feel optional. She didn't walk away angry. She walked away aware. And from that point on, Star didn't build walls. She built standards. Clear, firm, unspoken. Not to keep people out, but to make sure the wrong ones couldn't stay. The lessons didn't come all at once. They came in pieces, scattered across conversations, moments, small corrections that didn't seem big at the time, but stayed. One evening, the house was quieter than usual, not silent, just calmer. Star sat at the kitchen table, scrolling absent-mindedly, her expression tighter than she realized. Her older cousin, Renee, leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her for a second before speaking. "You're thinking too hard again," Renee said. Star glanced up. "I'm not." "You are," Renee cut in, walking over and pulling out the chair across from her. "What happened?" Star hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "It's just, people say one thing, and then they act different," she muttered. "And I don't get why." Renee nodded, like she'd heard that before. "Because words are easy," she said. "Consistency isn't." Star looked down at her hands. "So, what do you do with that?" Renee leaned forward slightly, her tone steady. "You stop listening to what they say, and you start watching what they do." That landed, not harsh, not heavy, just clear. Another time, it was her aunt again, same energy, same presence, catching Star just as she was about to leave the house. "Hold on," she called out. "Come here real quick." Star paused at the door. What now? Her aunt stepped closer, adjusting Star's jacket like she always did, even when it didn't need fixing. "Let me remind you of something," she said, softer this time. "You don't have to prove your value to anybody." Star frowned slightly. "I'm not trying to prove anything." Her aunt raised an eyebrow. You sure about that?" That made Star pause, just for a second. I mean, I just want things to work. Her aunt nodded slowly. And that's fine, but don't ever work harder than the situation deserves. A beat. Then she added, people will meet you at your level, or they won't. Your job isn't to lower yours to make them comfortable. Star didn't respond right away. She just stood there, letting that settle, because deep down, she knew exactly what that meant. And from that day on, she stopped explaining herself to people who weren't paying attention. Star was never loud about who she was. She didn't walk into rooms expecting attention, didn't need validation to feel secure. There was something steady about her, something people noticed without fully understanding why. She listened more than she spoke, observed more than she reacted, and when she did speak, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't careless. It came from a place that had already thought things through. That's why people sometimes misunderstood her. They saw the calm and assumed softness, saw the patience and assumed tolerance. But Star wasn't passive. She was intentional. There's a difference. She gave people space to show who they were, not because she didn't care, but because she refused to interrupt the truth when it revealed itself. And when it did, she didn't argue with it, didn't try to reshape it. She accepted it and adjusted accordingly. Well, not everyone understood that right away. Some thought her silence meant she didn't notice. Others assumed she'd always be there, no matter what. But that was never the case, because Star didn't stay where she wasn't valued. She just didn't always announce when she was leaving. And that quiet strength, that ability to step back without breaking down, without needing to explain every decision, that's what made her different. Not untouchable, not distant, just grounded in a way that couldn't be easily shaken. Even when everything around her started to shift, Damien Cole didn't walk into rooms. He shifted them, not loudly, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that made people adjust. Conversations slowed just slightly. Postures straightened, eyes followed, even when they tried not to. He carried himself like someone who had already calculated the outcome of whatever situation he stepped into. Tall, composed, precise. Every movement intentional, even the way he spoke. Measured, never rushed, never uncertain. And it wasn't just confidence. It was control. The kind that comes from being used to getting what you want, without having to ask twice. His world reflected that. Penthouse views stretching across the city, clean lines, minimal distractions, everything placed exactly where it belonged, nothing excessive, just refined. Because to Damien, simplicity wasn't about less. It was about control over more. He built his life the same way, strategically. Connections that served a purpose, decisions that made sense, nothing emotional, nothing unpredictable. And for the most part, it worked. People understood him, or at least, they understood how to deal with him. But Star, she didn't fit into that system. From the moment he met her, there was something different. She didn't lean in too quickly, didn't adjust her tone to match his, didn't seem impressed by the things that usually worked on everyone else. And that caught his attention, not in a loud way, but enough to make him pause, just briefly, because, for the first time in a while, he wasn't entirely sure how to read someone. At first, he told himself it was curiosity. That's what he called it. But the more time he spent around her, the more something else settled in. Quiet, unspoken, persistent. She must want something. It wasn't something he said out loud, not even to himself, directly, but it showed up in the way he looked at her, in the pauses between his questions, in the way he studied her responses, like he was waiting for the real intention to slip through. Because in Damien's world, nothing was ever just genuine. There was always an angle, always a reason. People didn't stay close unless there was something to gain. That's what experience had taught him. So when Star didn't ask for anything, didn't hint at anything, didn't try to position herself in his life the way others usually did, it didn't reassure him. It unsettled him. Because if she wasn't after something, Then what was she doing there? That question stayed in the background, even in their simplest moments. One evening, they sat across from each other, a quiet dinner that didn't need much conversation. Star spoke about something small. Work, a moment from her day. Nothing complicated, nothing layered. Just real. Damien listened, but not fully, because part of him was still searching, still trying to find the gap, the hidden motive. So, he said slowly, setting his glass down, what made you interested in me? The question landed differently than he intended. Not aggressive, not accusing, just slightly off. Star looked at him for a second, not confused, not offended, just aware. What do you mean? She asked. He shrugged lightly. I mean, you don't seem like the type to just go with things. So, I'm curious. There it was again, that need to define it, to categorize it, to make it make sense in a way he could control. Star held his gaze for a moment longer, then leaned back slightly. Well, I liked the conversation, she said simply. It felt easy. No extra meaning, no hidden depth. Just the truth. But Damien didn't fully accept it, because it didn't fit the pattern he was used to, and without realizing it, he had already started misreading her. It didn't happen all at once. There was no clear moment where things shifted from easy to complicated. It was quieter than that, slower, like something underneath their conversations kept brushing the surface, without fully breaking through. At first, it was small things. The way Damien would pause just a second too long before responding. The way his questions felt. Slightly off-center, not wrong, just searching for something that wasn't there. One evening they stood by the window in his penthouse, the city stretching out beneath them. Lights flickering, distant, constant. Star leaned lightly against the glass, her arms folded, watching the movement below. It's different up here, she said. Damien glanced over. Different? How? She thought for a second. Quieter, she replied, like everything is happening, but you're not really in it. He nodded slowly. That's kind of the point. She turned her head slightly, studying him. Is it? That question lingered. Not heavy, not confrontational, just present. Damien shifted his weight, slipping his hands into his pockets. Well, when you're trying to build something, he said, you don't always have time to be in everything. Star didn't respond immediately. She just looked back out at the city, taking that in, not disagreeing, not agreeing either, just noticing. Moments like that started happening more often. Conversations that began simple, but ended just slightly misaligned. Another night, sitting across from each other again, this time quieter than before. Damien tapped his fingers lightly against the table. You don't ask for much, he said. Star looked up. What do you mean? I mean... He hesitated briefly, choosing his words. Most people in your position would... She tilted her head just slightly. My position? He realized it as soon as he said it, but didn't take it back. Yeah. A pause settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just revealing. Star exhaled softly, her gaze steady. I didn't know I had one, she said. And that was the moment. Not a break, not an argument, but something in the air shifted, because what Damien saw as logic, Star felt as distance. What he thought was understanding was actually assumption, and neither of them said it out loud, but it stayed there, between them, growing. Quietly. Star wasn't confused. That was the thing. She didn't sit there wondering if something was off. She knew, not from one big moment, but from all the small ones adding up. The pauses, the phrasing, the way Damien looked at her sometimes, like he was still trying to figure out where she fit in his life. Not emotionally, logically, and that told her everything she needed to know. Still, she didn't confront him, didn't call it out, didn't force a conversation that he clearly wasn't ready to have, because Star understood something most people didn't. Timing matters. Pushing too early doesn't reveal truth. It distorts it. So instead, she watched, listened, let things play out. Not passively, but intentionally. One afternoon, they sat side by side, a quiet moment that should have felt easy. Damien scrolled through something on his phone, focused, detached. Star glanced at him briefly, then back ahead. "You don't really relax, do you?" she asked. He didn't look up. "I do." "When?" That made him pause, just for a second. Then he shrugged lightly. "When I need to." Star nodded slowly. "Right." That was all she said. No follow-up, no correction. But internally, she was adjusting. Well, maybe not deciding yet, but definitely recalibrating, because she could feel it now. That distance that wasn't physical, that gap between what something looked like and what it actually was. And the more she noticed it, the more she realized something simple. You can't build something real with someone who's still trying to measure your worth. So she didn't react. Not yet. She just paid attention. And sometimes, that's the most powerful move of all. The night didn't start tense. It rarely did. That was the confusing part about them. Things always looked fine, until you stayed long enough to feel what wasn't being said. The city stretched wide beneath Damien's penthouse windows, glowing in quiet patterns. Inside, everything was still, too still. Star stood near the glass again, arms loosely crossed, her reflection faintly staring back at her. Behind her, Damien poured himself a drink. No music, no distraction, just space. And space had a way of revealing things. "You've been quiet," he said, finally, not accusing, just noting. Star didn't turn right away. "Have I?" she replied. He glanced at her, then took a sip. "Yeah, more than usual." That wasn't entirely true. She had always been measured. But now, she was selective, and he could feel the difference, even if he didn't understand it yet. She turned slowly, leaning her back against the window this time. "Do you ever feel like something's off, even when everything looks okay?" she asked. Damien frowned slightly. "That's kind of vague." A small pause, not awkward, just telling. Star nodded once. "Yeah," she said softly. "It is." He set his glass down. "What are you trying to say?" There it was again. That shift toward clarity. But only when it was presented directly. Star studied him for a second, not searching, confirming. "I'm not trying to say anything," she replied. "I'm asking." Damien let out a quiet breath, stepping a little closer. "Well, no, I don't really operate like that." "How do you operate?" "Logically," he said. "If something's wrong, you address it. If it's not, then you don't create problems that aren't there." Star's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes settled, because that answer, it told her exactly where they were. "Right," she said. Just that. No pushback, no correction. But the air shifted again, and this time, it didn't move back. The silence stretched longer than either of them expected. Not uncomfortable, but not easy either. Just present. Damien picked up his glass again, more out of habit than anything else. Star watched him for a second. Then, she spoke. "Why do you look at me like I'm temporary?" It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional, but it landed. Direct, clear, unavoidable. Damien froze slightly, his grip tightening around the glass before he set it down again. "What?" Star didn't move, didn't soften it, didn't take it back. "Like I'm just passing through your life," she continued. "Like I don't really belong here." A quiet breath, then stillness. Damien stared at her, not angry, not defensive, just caught, because that wasn't a question he had prepared for. "I don't," he said quickly. Too quickly. Star noticed. Of course she did. "You do," she replied, not arguing, just stating, and that's what made it harder to dismiss. He stepped closer now, closing the space between them slightly. "You're not temporary," he said again. This time, slower, more controlled, but something was missing, and they both heard it. That small gap between what was said and what was felt. Star held his gaze, waiting, not for words, for something else, something real, but it didn't come, and that's when it settled for her. Not loudly, just quietly, because sometimes you don't need a long explanation to understand the truth. Sometimes you just need to hear what isn't being said. Damien stayed where he was, close enough to reach her, but not close enough to connect. The space between them felt smaller physically, but heavier, more defined. Star didn't move. She just watched him, not expecting perfection, not even expecting the right words, just something honest, something unfiltered, because this was the moment, the one where things either deepen or start to break. Damien ran his hand lightly across the back of his neck, exhaling through his nose. "You're overthinking this," he said. And just like that, something shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but internally. Something gave way. Star's expression didn't change, but her eyes did, just slightly, enough to show she heard exactly what that response meant. "I'm not," she said quietly. "You are," he insisted, his tone tightening just a little. "You're taking something simple and making it complicated." Simple, that word stayed in the air longer than anything else, because what he called simple was actually distance. What he called overthinking was actually awareness. Star lowered her gaze for a brief moment, then looked back at him. "Do you hear yourself?" she asked, not accusing, just checking. Damien frowned. "I'm trying to understand why this is even an issue." There it was, that gap again, wider now, clearer, because to him, there was nothing to fix, and to her, that was the problem. A quiet pause settled between them, not tense, not explosive, just final, in a way that didn't need volume. Star nodded once, slowly. "Okay," that word, again, but this time, it meant something different. Not agreement, not resolution, just recognition, because she realized something in that moment. He wasn't holding back on purpose. He just didn't have what she needed to hear. And that kind of realization, it doesn't come with anger. It comes with clarity, and clarity can be quiet, but it changes everything. The night didn't end with a fight. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no dramatic exit. They stayed in the same space. But something between them had already stepped back. Damien moved around the room like usual, checking his phone, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting, restoring control. That's what he did when things felt off. Star watched him for a moment, then turned back toward the window. The city was still there, unchanged, moving, alive, but she felt separate from it, not isolated, just aware of the distance. Well, maybe not distance, something else, something harder to name, because it wasn't that she didn't care, it was that she understood, and understanding doesn't always bring comfort. Sometimes it just removes the illusion. She exhaled slowly, her reflection staring back at her again. Same posture, same presence, but internally, something had shifted, not broken, not yet, just adjusted, because she saw it clearly now. This wasn't about one conversation, or one moment. This was about a pattern, a way of thinking, a gap between how they experienced the same connection, and no matter how much chemistry existed between them, that gap didn't close on its own. Damien glanced over at her briefly. "You good?" he asked, casual, almost automatic. Star didn't turn. "Yeah," she said, and in that moment, that answer wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either, because she was good. Just not in the same way she used to be. And, sometimes, that's where everything begins to change. After that night, things didn't fall apart. Not on the surface. If anything, they looked even smoother. Conversations still happened. Plans were still made. They still spent time together. Late evenings, quiet dinners, moments that should have meant something deeper. And sometimes, they did. Damien would reach for her hand without thinking, his thumb brushing lightly across her skin like it was familiar, like it belonged there. Star didn't pull away. She let it happen. Let the moment exist for what it was, because the connection between them, it wasn't fake. That's what made it complicated. It was real, just incomplete. One night, they sat closer than usual, the distance between them almost non-existent. Damien leaned in slightly, his voice softer than she was used to hearing. "You're different when you're quiet like this," he said. Star glanced at him. "How?" "Less guarded," he replied. That made her pause, not outwardly, just internally, because that wasn't how she saw it. "I'm not guarded," she said. He tilted his head a little. "You don't let people all the way in." There it was again. That interpretation, that assumption. Star looked at him for a second longer than usual. "Or maybe," she said slowly, "I just don't rush what hasn't earned that yet." A small silence followed, not tense, just revealing. Damien didn't respond immediately. And Star? She didn't push him to, because even in moments where they felt close, there was always something just beneath it. That kept it from going deeper, and both of them felt it, even if they didn't name it. There were nights where everything felt easy, uncomplicated, like whatever stood between them had taken a step back, just enough to let something softer exist. Those moments came quietly, no build-up, no announcement, just a shift, like the world outside slowed down for a second. One evening, they sat on the couch, nothing playing on the screen, no real conversation happening, just presence. Damien rested his arm along the back, his fingers brushing lightly against her shoulder. Not intentional, not planned, just natural. Star leaned into it slightly, not fully, just enough. And for a moment, it felt real, simple, the kind of connection that didn't need to be explained. But even in that stillness, something lingered, unspoken, because comfort without trust doesn't settle the same way. "You ever think about where this is going?" Damien asked suddenly. Star didn't look at him right away. "Sometimes," she replied. "What do you see?" That question stayed in the air a little longer than expected, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was deciding how much of it to say. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "I see potential," she said. Honest, measured. Then she added, "But I also see hesitation." A quiet shift. Damien's expression tightened, just a fraction. "I'm not hesitant," he said. Star held his gaze. "You are," she replied, not arguing, just stating. Another pause, this one heavier, because even in their softest moments, that underlying doubt never fully left. It just waited, and the more those moments repeated, the clearer it became. Chemistry could bring them close, but without trust, it could never hold them there. It didn't explode. That's what made it harder to define. Nothing between them ever fully broke. It just shifted back and forth, like something trying to settle, but never quite finding where it belonged. There were days Damien leaned in more than usual, texts that came earlier than expected, calls that lasted longer, moments where his tone softened, his attention sharper, like he was trying, in his own way, to close that gap. And Star felt it. Of course she did. She responded, not with excitement, but with openness, because she wasn't closed off. She just moved with intention. One afternoon, they sat across from each other again. Different setting, same dynamic. Damien leaned forward slightly. "You've been distant," he said. Star raised an eyebrow. "Have I?" "Yeah," he replied. "More than before." She studied him for a second, not defensive, just steady. "Or maybe I'm just matching the energy I'm getting. That landed, not harsh, but direct enough to shift the moment. Damien leaned back, exhaling lightly. That's not fair. Star tilted her head. What part? The part where you assume I'm not showing up. She didn't respond immediately, just watched him, carefully, because this wasn't about proving a point. It was about understanding what was actually happening. I'm not assuming, she said. I'm observing. A quiet pause followed. Damien looked away briefly, running his hand across his jaw. You make everything feel like a test, he muttered. Star blinked once. Slow. That's interesting, she said, because I haven't asked you to prove anything. And there it was again. That subtle tension, not loud, not confrontational, but constant, because every time one of them leaned in, the other adjusted, not intentionally, but enough to keep things from settling. And over time, that push and pull started to feel less like balance and more like misalignment. The frustration didn't show up all at once. It built quietly, layer by layer, not through arguments, but through repetition, the same patterns, the same conversations that never quite reached a conclusion, the same feeling of almost, but not fully. Star noticed it first, not as anger, not even as disappointment, just a slow shift in how she experienced him. The things that once felt intriguing, now felt unclear. The moments that once felt promising, now felt incomplete. Well, not incomplete. Just limited. And she didn't rush to fix it, didn't try to force clarity where there wasn't any, because she understood something deeper. You can't build certainty from inconsistency. One evening, they sat side by side again, the silence stretching comfortably, but not meaningfully. Damien glanced over at her. You're thinking again, he said. Star gave a faint smile. I always am. He shook his head lightly. You don't have to analyze everything. That word again, analyze, like what she was doing was excessive, unnecessary. Star looked at him, her expression calm but firm. I'm not analyzing, she said. I'm paying attention. A brief silence followed. Damien didn't respond, because deep down, he knew there was a difference. And Star? She felt it clearly now. That growing awareness, that quiet distance forming, not from lack of feeling, but from lack of alignment. She wasn't frustrated because things were bad. She was frustrated because they weren't right. And the longer that went unaddressed, the more something inside her began to shift. Not breaking, not yet, just preparing, because when clarity settles in slowly, it doesn't shock you when things end, it just makes the ending make sense. The shift didn't come with an announcement, no long message, no sit-down conversation, no moment where Star said, this isn't working. Instead, it showed up in what she stopped doing. She stopped filling in the gaps, stopped asking questions she already knew the answers to, stopped leaning forward when nothing met her halfway. And the thing about it? It wasn't obvious, not to someone who wasn't paying attention closely, but Star always moved like that. Subtle, intentional. One evening, Damien texted her, you good? Short, casual, the kind of message that usually came with an expectation of a quick reply. Star saw it. Of course she did. But this time, she didn't respond immediately. Not to play games, not to create distance, just because she no longer felt the need to rush. Minutes passed, then longer. Eventually, she replied, yeah, just busy. Simple, no extra warmth, no added effort to keep the conversation going. And for the first time, she left it there. Damien stared at the message when it came through, reading it once. Then again, it wasn't cold, but it wasn't her usual tone either. And that difference? He noticed it, just didn't fully understand it yet. Another day, they met in person. Same setting, same environment, but something felt lighter on her side, not emotionally, just detached in a way that wasn't obvious at first glance. She listened when he spoke, responded when needed, but she didn't extend the moment, didn't try to hold on to it, and Damien felt it. That small shift in energy. You seem different, he said. Star glanced at him briefly. How? Less engaged. She held his gaze for a second, then looked away. Well, maybe I'm just more aware now. That answer didn't land the way he expected, because it didn't give him anything to push against. No emotion, no tension, just truth. And the more she pulled back like that, quietly, consistently, the more space she created between them, not loud enough to confront, but clear enough to feel. At first, Damien didn't react to the shift, not directly. He noticed it. But, instead of leaning in, he adjusted around it, filled the space with other things, work, meetings, late nights that stretched longer than necessary. Not because he had to, but because it was easier than addressing what was changing. One evening, his phone buzzed again. Another message, another invitation, another distraction. He glanced at it, then leaned back in his chair. Yeah, he muttered under his breath, picking up his jacket. It wasn't about anything serious, just somewhere else to be, somewhere that didn't require emotional clarity. And slowly, that became a pattern. Later nights, shorter conversations, more time spent away from anything that felt uncertain. Star noticed. Of course she did, but she didn't question it, didn't ask where he was going, didn't ask why things felt different, because she already knew, not specifics, but direction, and that was enough. One night, Damien called her. It rang longer than usual before she picked up. "Hey," she said, her voice calm, neutral. "Hey," he replied. "You good?" A small pause. "Yeah, you?" "I'm out," he said, "just finishing up some things." Star nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see it. "Okay." That was it. No follow-up, no curiosity, and for a moment, that caught him off guard, because she didn't ask anything, didn't press, didn't react. And, oddly enough, that made him more aware of the distance than any confrontation would have. "Well, I'll talk to you later," he said. "Sure," she replied. And when the call ended, the silence that followed felt different. Not heavy, not uncomfortable, just empty in a way that didn't need explanation. And that's how it began, not with betrayal, not with a clear break, but with distance that neither of them tried hard enough to close. It wasn't one moment. It was many small ones, almost forgettable on their own. But together, they started to form something neither of them could ignore anymore. A gap, not physical, not even obvious at first, just emotional. The kind that shows up in silence, in responses that feel complete, but not connected, in moments that should mean something, but don't fully land. One evening, they sat across from each other again. Same table, same setting, but the energy, different. Damien spoke about his day, numbers, meetings, decisions that seemed important in his world. Star listened, nodded when appropriate, but she wasn't in it, not the way she used to be. And that's when I told him we weren't moving forward unless the terms changed, Damien finished, leaning back slightly. Star gave a small nod. That makes sense? That was all, no follow-up, no curiosity. And Damien noticed. "That's it?" he asked. She looked at him. "What do you mean? You don't have anything else to say?" A pause, not long, just enough to show she was choosing her response. "Not really," she replied. And that was new, because before, she would have asked questions, engaged deeper, pulled meaning from what he said. Now, she let it sit where it was, surface level, and Damien felt it, that absence, that quiet shift. "Feels like you're not really here," he said. Star held his gaze. "I am." But even as she said it, both of them knew. It wasn't the same, because presence without connection doesn't carry the same weight. And the more those moments repeated, the clearer it became. They weren't arguing. They weren't fighting. They were just drifting slowly, without resistance. And that kind of distance, it's harder to fix because it doesn't demand attention. It just grows. Now pause for a second, because this right here, this moment, it's where a lot of people get it wrong. Not the betrayal, not the big reveal, but this part, the quiet shift, the part where nothing looks broken, but everything feels different. Let me ask you something. Be honest. When someone starts pulling away like that, not dramatically, not loudly, just subtly, what do you do? Do you chase? Do you try harder? Speak more? Show up more? Hoping it brings things back? Or do you step back, give space, and see what they do when you're no longer filling the gap? Because that choice, it says a lot, not just about the situation, but about you. So go ahead. Drop it in the comments. I'm curious to see where you stand on that. And if this is hitting a little close to home, make sure you're still here with me. Because what happens next, it doesn't just test their connection, it exposes it completely. She wasn't complicated. That was the first thing Damien noticed. No pauses that made him think deeper. No questions that lingered longer than expected. No quiet moments that forced reflection. Just ease. Her name was Vanessa, and everything about her felt light. She laughed quickly, sometimes before the moment even settled, agreed easily, moved through conversations without slowing them down. The first time they met, she leaned in slightly, smiling like she had already decided the energy she was bringing into the room. "You don't say much, do you?" she teased. Damien gave a faint smirk. "I say what's necessary." She laughed again, soft, effortless. I like that," she said. Mysterious, but not trying too hard. That landed differently. Because with Star, every interaction held weight, meaning. With Vanessa, there was none of that. And that was the appeal. No need to explain himself. No need to be understood beyond the surface. No need to sit in silence and feel something forming beneath it. Just smooth interaction. "You're intense," Vanessa added casually, tilting her head, but not in a bad way. Damien raised an eyebrow. "Not in a bad way?" "No," she said quickly, smiling again. "In a confident way. Like you already know what you're doing." That was it. That alignment. Not accurate, but comfortable, because she saw him the way he was used to being seen. Not questioned, not examined, just accepted at face value. And compared to the quiet depth Star carried, this felt simple, predictable, easy to navigate. And for someone like Damien, that kind of simplicity, it didn't challenge him. It welcomed him. It didn't happen with intention. Not at first. Damien didn't sit down and decide, "This is what I'm choosing." It was more subtle than that. A gradual shift. A quiet leaning toward what felt easier to manage. Because with Star, every interaction required presence, awareness, a level of engagement he couldn't fake. But with Vanessa, there was none of that pressure, no depth to meet, no expectation to rise to, just moments that stayed exactly where they were. One evening, he found himself sitting across from Vanessa again. Same relaxed energy, same easy conversation. "You work too much," she said playfully, swirling her drink. Damien shrugged. "Comes with what I do." "Well, you should take a break more often," she replied. "Life's not just about structure all the time." He smirked slightly. "And what's it about?" Vanessa leaned forward just a little, her tone light. "Enjoying things, not overthinking them." That word again, but this time, it didn't feel like resistance. It felt like permission, and that's what made it dangerous. Because instead of questioning him, she reinforced him. "You're different when you relax," she added. "Less intense." Damien leaned back in his seat. Maybe that's the point. And just like that, he adjusted, not drastically, just enough, choosing moments that didn't ask more from him than he was willing to give, spending time where he didn't feel observed, where nothing was being measured, and slowly, without fully acknowledging it, he started choosing comfort over clarity, because comfort didn't confront him. It didn't reflect anything back at him. It just let him exist, and that felt easier than facing what he had been avoiding all along. With Vanessa, conversations didn't stretch. They didn't pause long enough to reveal anything deeper. They moved quickly, lightly, like nothing needed to stay long enough to matter. One evening, they sat across from each other again. The atmosphere relaxed, almost predictable. Vanessa smiled, resting her chin lightly on her hand. "So, what's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done?" she asked. Damien gave a short laugh. "I don't really do spontaneous." She raised an eyebrow playfully. "Seriously? Not even once?" He shook his head. "I plan things. That's how you stay ahead." Vanessa leaned back, smiling wider. That explains a lot." "Like what?" "Like why you always seem so in control," she said. "It's kind of attractive, honestly." There it was again. Affirmation without depth. No curiosity about why he needed control. No attempt to understand where it came from. Just acceptance of what was visible. Damien nodded slightly. Control keeps things simple. Vanessa laughed softly. "Well, I like simple," she said. "Complicated just makes things messy." A small pause followed. Not heavy, just empty in a way that didn't demand anything more. Damien glanced at her. "You don't ask a lot of questions." She shrugged lightly. "Why would I? If something's good, I just enjoy it." That response, it fit perfectly into the space he had created. No pressure, no reflection, just surface-level connection that never pushed past what was comfortable. And the more they talked, the clearer it became. This wasn't about understanding. It was about ease. And ease doesn't require depth. At some point, it stopped being accidental. Damien knew, not in a loud, obvious way, but in that quiet space where awareness sits, waiting to be acknowledged. He understood the difference between what he had with Star and what he had with Vanessa. One required him to show up fully. The other didn't, and instead of leaning into the one that challenged him, he drifted toward the one that didn't. Well, maybe not drift. Maybe chose, even if he didn't say it out loud. Because, with Star, there were expectations he couldn't ignore, moments that required honesty, conversations that demanded something real. And with Vanessa, none of that existed. She didn't question him, didn't push him, didn't reflect anything back that made him pause. She accepted what was presented and left it there. And for Damien, that felt manageable, safe, but underneath that comfort was something else, something quieter, less convenient, because avoiding depth doesn't remove it, it just delays it. And the longer he stayed in that space, the easier it became to ignore what actually mattered, not because it wasn't important, but because it required more than he was willing to give. And that, more than anything, was his flaw. Not that he didn't understand depth, but that he chose not to engage with it. By this point, nothing between Damien and Star had officially ended. No conversation, no decision, no clear line drawn. And somehow, that made it easier for him to move the way he did. Because in his mind, if nothing was broken, then nothing had to be fixed. That's how he justified it. Quietly, internally, without ever saying it out loud. One evening, Damien sat across from Vanessa again. The atmosphere relaxed, untouched by anything serious. She smiled as she scrolled through something on her phone. "You travel a lot, right?" she asked. "Sometimes," he replied, "when it makes sense." Vanessa looked up, a playful spark in her eyes. "So, where are you taking me next?" He smirked faintly. "You assume I'm taking you somewhere?" She leaned forward slightly. "I don't assume," she said. "I just know you like control and planning." That made him pause, just for a second, because she wasn't wrong, and somehow, that made the idea easier to entertain. "Dubai," he said after a moment. Vanessa blinked, then smiled wider. "Wait, You're serious? Damien nodded once. First class, private suite. A week. Her reaction was immediate. Excited, unfiltered. She reached across the table, brushing her fingers lightly against his. You spoil me, she said softly. There was no hesitation in her voice, no second layer, just enjoyment. And Damien? He liked that, the simplicity of it. No questions about meaning, no curiosity about where things stood, just acceptance of the moment as it was, and without fully acknowledging it. He had already set something in motion. Not just a trip, but a decision, one that would eventually meet something he hadn't prepared for. The conversation with Star didn't feel dramatic. It didn't carry weight the way it should have. And that was the problem. They sat together, the same familiar space, the same quiet rhythm that had slowly become normal between them. Damien spoke first. I'll be out of town for a few days, he said. Star looked up from where she sat. Work? She asked. Yeah, he replied. Business trip. Simple, direct, clean, no hesitation in his tone, no pause that gave anything away. And Star? She didn't question it, not because she believed everything blindly, but because she had already reached a point where she didn't feel the need to investigate. Okay, she said, that was it. No follow-up, no curiosity about details, no shift in her expression. And for a moment, Damien noticed that, really noticed it, because before, she would have asked something, engaged more. Now, she just accepted it, and moved on. You're not going to ask anything? He said. Star met his gaze. What would I ask? Another pause. Short, but enough. I don't know, he replied. Where I'm going. How long I'll be gone. She held his gaze for a second longer, then looked away. You'll tell me what matters, she said. And that response, it landed in a way he didn't expect. Not suspicious, not emotional, just distant. Like she wasn't trying to hold on to information that no longer felt important. And instead of questioning that, Damien let it sit, because it made things easier. No resistance, no confrontation, just space. And in that space, the lie stayed intact. For now, across the city, in a space that felt completely separate from everything Damien was doing, Star stood in uniform, a folder resting lightly in her hands. She had just finished a long shift. Nothing unusual, nothing that hinted at anything changing, until her supervisor called her name. Star, hold on a second. She turned, stepping closer. Yes? Her supervisor smiled, handing her the folder. I think you're going to like this. Star glanced down, her fingers brushing over the paper before opening it. At first, she didn't react. Her eyes moved across the page once, then again, slower this time, more focused. Wait, she said quietly. Her supervisor tilted her head. What is it? Star looked up. Dubai? There was no excitement in her voice yet, just surprise. Her supervisor nodded. International route assignment. You earned it. A small silence followed, not empty, just full in a different way, because for a moment, everything else faded. The tension, the distance, the uncertainty that had been sitting quietly in the background of her life. And in its place, something else appeared, clear, grounded, deserved. Star looked back down at the paper, her grip tightening slightly. Not out of stress, but recognition. This mattered, not emotionally, not relationally, but personally, and that difference, it settled deep. Okay, she said softly, not loud, not dramatic, just certain. Her supervisor smiled again. I knew you'd handle it like that. Star nodded once, closing the folder, and for the first time in a while, her focus shifted away from what wasn't working to something that was. Later that evening, Star sat alone. The folder rested beside her, open now, revisited more than once. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she was processing what it meant. Dubai, the same destination Damien had mentioned earlier. That detail, it didn't hit her all at once. It came in slowly, quietly, like something connecting without forcing itself. She leaned back slightly, her fingers resting along the edge of the paper. "That's interesting," she murmured. "Not suspicion, not assumption, just awareness." Because timing like that, it always meant something, even if she didn't define it yet. For a moment, she considered telling him, just bringing it up casually, letting the information sit between them. But something in her paused, not hesitation, just choice. Well, maybe a little hesitation, because she wasn't sure what she expected from that conversation. So instead, she let the thought settle, let it breathe. And then, a small shift in her expression, subtle but present. "Maybe I'll surprise him," she said softly, not playful, not strategic, just intentional. Because this time, she wasn't reacting to anything, she was simply moving forward, on her own terms, and without realizing it. Two separate paths had just aligned, heading toward the same place, at the same time, with completely different intentions, and neither of them fully understood what was about to happen. Airports always carry movement. People coming, going, transitioning between versions of their lives without even realizing it. And that morning, everything felt normal, at least on the surface. Damien walked through the terminal with the same controlled pace he always had. Confident, focused, unbothered. Vanessa walked beside him, her energy lighter, her attention shifting between her phone and everything around them. "This place is always so busy," she said, adjusting her bag. "It's expected," Damien replied. "International flights." She smiled slightly. "I still like it. Feels like something's always about to happen." He didn't respond to that, because for him, this was routine, predictable, planned, until it wasn't. They reached the boarding gate. The line moved steadily, no interruptions, no signs that anything was different. And then he stepped forward, just one step. That's all it took. His eyes lifted, and everything stopped. Not physically. The line kept moving. People kept talking. But for Damien, everything slowed. "Wait," he muttered under his breath. Vanessa glanced at him. "What?" He didn't answer, because standing there, at the entrance of the aircraft, was Star, in uniform, composed, exactly where she was supposed to be, just not where he expected her. His body reacted before his mind caught up. A slight pause in his movement, a shift in his posture, something small, but enough. Vanessa noticed. "Hey, what's wrong?" she asked quietly. Damien swallowed. Hard. "That's..." He stopped, because the words didn't come out clean, didn't come out controlled. And Star? She had already seen them. Not just him, but the way they stood, the closeness, the familiarity, everything he hadn't explained, everything she hadn't asked about. Now, right there, clear, unavoidable. Damien stepped forward quickly, lowering his voice. "Wait, don't do this here." Not anger, not yet, just urgency. Because this moment, this wasn't part of the plan, not even close. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't know how to control what came next. Star didn't react the way most people would. No raised voice, no visible shock, no immediate confrontation. And somehow, that made everything feel heavier. She stood there, still, composed, her gaze steady as it moved between Damien and Vanessa, taking in everything without rushing to respond. For a brief second, her eyes lingered on him, not searching, not questioning, just seeing, fully, and that alone shifted the entire moment. Damien stepped closer, lowered his voice again. "Star, we can talk about this, just..." "Good evening," she said. Soft, controlled, professional. The words cut through him. Not because of how they sounded, but because of what they weren't. There was no emotion in them, no reaction, just distance. Vanessa looked between them, confusion settling in. "Do you know her?" she asked, Star didn't answer right away. Her attention stayed on Damien for just a moment longer. Long enough for the silence to settle. Then, she turned slightly, her expression unchanged, and spoke. "Welcome on board, Mr. and Mrs." A pause, small, precise. "I hope you both enjoy your flight." The words landed quietly, but the impact, immediate. Vanessa stiffened. "Wait, what does that mean?" she asked, her voice tightening slightly. Damien didn't respond, couldn't, because, in that moment, everything had already been exposed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. And Star? She didn't wait, didn't explain, didn't stay in the discomfort. She simply stepped aside, creating space for them to walk through, as if nothing had happened. And that silence, that control, was more powerful than anything she could have said. They made it to their seats. But the air didn't settle. It followed them, sat between them, heavy, quiet, impossible to ignore. Vanessa shifted slightly, her earlier confidence fading into something tighter. "Okay, you need to explain that," she said, her voice lower now, controlled but strained. What did she mean back there? Damien didn't answer immediately. He stared ahead, jaw set, fingers pressing lightly against the armrest, because there was no version of this. That came out clean. "It's complicated," he said finally. Vanessa turned toward him fully. "No, it's not," she replied. "Either I'm missing something, or..." Her words stopped, because movement in the aisle caught her attention. Star, approaching, professional, composed, every step measured, not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate. She stopped beside their row. For a second, no one spoke. Then Star looked directly at Vanessa, not with hostility, not with judgment, just clarity. "I'm his wife." The words were simple, no added tone, no explanation, and that's what made them land the way they did. Vanessa blinked, once, then again, like her mind was trying to process something that didn't align with what she had been told. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Star didn't repeat herself, didn't expand, because she didn't need to. The truth had already been placed exactly where it belonged. And Damien? He felt it, not just the exposure, but the control in it, because Star didn't raise her voice, didn't demand anything. She simply told the truth and left it there. Most people would have reacted, raised their voice, forced the moment to explode, but Star didn't operate like that. She understood something deeper. Reaction gives away control. And she wasn't giving him any, not now, not here, not ever again. She held that space for just a second longer, then shifted her attention away, like the moment had already passed, like there was nothing left to prove. Vanessa leaned back slowly, her expression tightening as she glanced between them. "You told me you weren't married," she said, her voice quieter now. Damien didn't respond, because anything he said in that moment would sound exactly like what it was. Too late. Star didn't stay, didn't wait for answers. She continued down the aisle, moving as if this was just another part of her shift. And that was the shift. Not the exposure, not the truth, but the way she carried it. Hours later, somewhere in the middle of the flight, Star returned, same calm presence, same measured pace. She stopped briefly beside Damien's seat. He looked up. Finally, their eyes met, and for the first time since everything unfolded, there was no distraction, no buffer, just clarity. Star leaned slightly closer, not enough to invade space, just enough to be heard. "I hope your trip goes exactly how you planned." A pause, soft, controlled, then she straightened and walked away. No anger, no bitterness, just finality. And Damien? He sat there, still, because in that moment, something shifted inside him. Not loud, not immediate, but undeniable. For the first time, he saw it, not the situation, not the mistake, but her, clearly. And that realization, It didn't come with relief. It came with something heavier, something he couldn't ignore anymore. Relief. It came with something heavier, something he couldn't ignore anymore.
If you like the story, please subscribe, like, leave a comment, and share with your friends and family. Thank you.